I read her message with my phone lighting up the dark kitchen, and my stomach went cold because it sounded like something you sent when you were done being alive. The boys were in the next room, breathing in their sleep, and for a second I could not move. I stared at the screen and tried to force the words to become normal. They did not. This started like any other week. I had picked the kids up for my custody week like I always did. 2 miles of quiet streets, the same turns, the same timing. Their backpacks were heavy, their minds were already on school. Their mother handed them off the way she always did, with that careful distance we had carried for years. We had been divorced for 6 years, and we had trained ourselves to speak only in schedules and school events. It had made things calm. It had made things simple. It had also made it easy to miss changes. Over the last year she had been different. Not dramatic, not unstable, just warmer. She texted more. She asked small questions that had nothing to do with custody. She used my name more. Sometimes she thanked me for things I had always done. I kept my replies short, not because I hated her, but because I did not trust sudden warmth. I told myself it was her trying to co-parent better. I told myself it was safe to stay careful. Monday night looked normal from the outside. Dinner, homework, showers, lights out. The younger one needed me to check the closet like always. The older one acted like he did not need anything, but he still listened for me in the hallway. I moved through it all like a machine because routine made the house feel steady. Then my phone buzzed. Her message was longer than usual. She wrote about me being a good dad. She wrote it like she had been watching me from far away and wanted me to know she saw it. She said I had done right by the boys. She said she appreciated me. Then she asked me to tell them she loved them. Not in the normal way, not like a reminder for bedtime. It read like a request you made when you knew you would not get another chance. I sat at the table with the phone in my hand, and I reread it until the words lost shape. I tried to build an explanation that did not scare me. I told myself she was emotional. I told myself she had a hard day. I told myself people said strange things when they were lonely. But her tone did not match the person I had known since the divorce. She had been guarded for years. Even when we were polite, there was a wall. This message had no wall. It felt like it came from someone standing at the edge of something. I walked to the boys' rooms and looked at them sleeping. The older one had his blanket kicked down, one arm hanging off the bed. The younger one was curled tight, his face pressed into his pillow like he was holding his breath. I stood there longer than I needed to, listening. I had the sudden thought that if I said her message out loud, it would make it real. So I did not. The strange part was what did not happen next. On her nights, she usually called to say good night. It was not every single time, but it was enough that the boys expected it. The younger one listened for the phone like it was part of the bedtime routine. The older one pretended he did not care, but he still glanced at the clock and asked if she had texted. That night the call never came. I watched the minutes move past the usual time. I checked my phone again. No new message. I checked the boys' phones. Nothing there either. I told myself she had fallen asleep. I told myself she had left her phone in another room. I told myself a lot of things because the alternative was a thought I did not want to hold. I went back to the kitchen and set my phone face down on the table like I could hide the message by not looking at it. The house was quiet in the way it always got after bedtime, but now the quiet felt like it had weight. I heard the refrigerator hum, the air vent click, the faint traffic outside. Normal sounds that should have calmed me. They did not. I picked the phone up again and read her last line one more time. Tell the boys I love them. It did not sound like a reminder. It sounded like instructions. I wanted to call her. I wanted to ask if she was okay. I also did not want to. Calling would mean admitting I was scared. It would mean crossing the boundary we had built for years. It would mean hearing something in her voice that confirmed what my body already knew. So I waited. I told myself I would check in the morning. I told myself I was being reasonable. I told myself I was protecting the kids from unnecessary worry. I went to bed with my phone on the nightstand and the brightness turned up, like I was expecting it to light up again. I slept in short pieces, waking up to nothing. By the next day, silence was the loudest thing in the story. Silence the next morning did not feel like a missed text. It felt like a missing person, and it pushed me back into the system we had built after the divorce. That system had kept our lives moving, even when we did not trust each other. It also trained me to ignore my instincts, because instincts caused fights and fights broke the schedule. 2 houses, 1 schedule, and almost no real connection. 6 years earlier, the divorce had not ended with peace. It had ended with paperwork, deadlines, and a kind of anger that never fully burned out. We had not screamed in court or thrown things, but we had both learned how to hurt each other with small choices. Who got the better holiday? Who paid for what? Who looked reasonable on email and who looked difficult? It had been ugly in a quiet way, the kind that lasted. When it was finally done, we lived close enough that handoffs could stay simple. 2 miles apart meant the boys did not have to change schools. It meant the same friends, the same streets, the same sports fields. It also meant I could never pretend she was far away. She was always near, like a neighbor you never spoke to. Week on, week off became our religion. Monday pickups, the same backpacks, the same folders, the same missing socks. It worked because it removed emotion from the process. We did not need to talk about how we felt. We only needed to exchange information like we were running a business together. If a kid was sick, we texted. If a school event changed, we texted. If a payment was due, we texted. That was it. I did not avoid closeness because I wanted her to suffer. I avoided closeness because closeness felt like a trap. Every time we tried to be friendly after the divorce, it turned into confusion. A kind message would be remembered later as proof of something. A small favor would become a debt. I had learned to keep my words clean and minimal. When you stayed cold, nobody could accuse you of leading them on, or twisting the past, or rewriting what happened. For years, she matched that distance. If I sent a message, I got a short reply. If she sent one, it had a clear purpose. There were no jokes, no extra updates, no casual talk. Our connection was the boys, and we treated that connection like a narrow bridge we crossed carefully. The boys grew up inside that pattern. They did not know every detail of why we split, but they knew we lived in 2 homes. They knew the calendar mattered. They knew their parents did not sit together at games unless it was required. They adapted in the way kids always did. They became good at transitions. They learned where their things belonged. They learned which rules lived in which house. I told myself that was success. Then, over the last year, the pattern shifted in small ways that were easy to dismiss. She started sending messages that were not required. Not long confessions, not dramatic speeches, just small comments. She would mention that the boys seemed happy. She would thank me for handling a school issue. She would add a line that did not belong in our old system. At first I assumed she wanted something: money, a schedule change, a favor. I waited for the real request. Sometimes it came, sometimes it did not. And when it did not, it made me uneasy because it did not fit the history. Her tone was different too. The guarded edges softened. The messages sounded like she was trying to stand closer than the bridge allowed. She was not flirty. She was not cruel. She sounded tired and strangely gentle, like she had been holding something in and decided, suddenly, to stop holding it. I did not meet her there. I stayed practical. I answered what I had to answer, and I ignored the rest. Part of me felt guilty because I knew what it meant to be alone, but another part of me was still living in the divorce, still remembering how quickly things could turn. I thought distance was safer for the boys. I thought it was safer for me. The trouble with distance was that it made it hard to notice danger until it was close. I thought about that Tuesday morning while I moved through the start of the day. The boys were getting ready for school, and I was moving faster than my thoughts could catch up. My phone stayed quiet. No goodnight call had come, and now there was no morning message either. That was not proof of anything. People slept in. People forgot. Phones died. But her Monday night text sat in my mind like a stone. It had a weight that did not match the situation. Praise from her did not belong in our system. Gratitude did not belong in our system. Asking me to tell the boys she loved them did not belong in our system. I kept hearing that line like it had been said out loud in a room with no air. I tried to remind myself of the facts. She had been more talkative lately. She had been friendlier. Maybe she had simply decided to change how we co-parented. Maybe she wanted a calmer relationship before the boys got older and started noticing more. Maybe it was as simple as that. But even that simple explanation had a sharp edge. Why now? Why that night? Why that tone that sounded final? The last year of friendliness had seemed like a slow thaw. That Monday night message felt like a sudden heat, too intense, too fast, like something breaking under pressure. I stared at my phone more than I should have, waiting for the normal logistic text that would calm me. The message never came, and the longer it stayed silent, the more I understood that the only thing holding our co-parenting world together was routine. Then the routine got one small crack. She started talking like we were friends. I had built my life around a clean boundary. Her life was not my business and my life was not hers. It sounded healthy when I said it to myself. It sounded mature. In reality, it made me blind in the exact way that mattered. He knew her as a co-parent, not as a person. After the divorce, I stopped asking questions that were not required. I did not ask how she was doing. I did not ask who she spent time with. I did not ask what her weekends looked like when the boys were with me. I did not want to know. Knowing felt like stepping back into a room I had fought hard to leave. That boundary came with a cost I did not admit. It meant I had no map of her life. I did not know her neighbors. I did not know if she had close friends nearby. I did not know who she would call when she got scared or sick or overwhelmed. I told myself she had people. People always had people. I never checked. We did not have a shared friend group anymore. Anyone we had known as a couple had chosen a side or drifted away or stayed polite at a distance. If I ran into someone at a school event, it was a short conversation about the kids, nothing else. Nobody felt like a real bridge between our two lives. Nobody felt like someone I could contact and say, "Something is wrong, can you check on her?" Her parents were not in town. They were out of state, far enough that a drive was an all-day decision. I had their names and faces in my memory, but not their numbers in my phone. We were connected on paper, through the boys, but not connected in any practical way. If something happened, I would not know who to alert. I would not know who would even answer. I acted like that did not matter because I believed it was safer. Safer for the boys because it kept conflict low. Safer for me because it kept my head clear. I treated our co-parenting like a machine. Input a schedule, output a handoff, and do not open the casing. When her messages had started getting warmer over the last year, I saw them as noise outside the system. I did not ask what changed. I did not ask if she was lonely or depressed or scared. I did not ask if something had happened. I told myself that if she needed help, she would say so directly. That was another belief I had held onto. Adults handled their own problems. We were divorced. She was capable. She had her own life. I was not her rescuer. I repeated those lines in my head like rules because rules were easier than emotion. So when Tuesday morning came and she did not respond, my brain tried to keep everything inside those old rules. The first sign was small. I needed a quick answer about a school book, something the older one said was at her house. It was normal to text about stuff like that. Our messages were full of small objects that moved back and forth between two homes. Shoes, chargers, sports gear, homework packets. A book was nothing. I sent the message and waited. No reply. I checked her last active time without thinking, like I could measure safety by a tiny indicator on a screen. That told me nothing. It only made me stare harder. I looked out my front window at the street, even though her house was not visible from mine. I did it anyway, as if I could see through walls and distance if I tried hard enough. I could not. I kept thinking about her car. On the drive to drop the boys at school, I had passed her street and noticed it still parked where it usually was. That should not have meant anything. People worked from home. People took days off. People forgot to move their cars. But her car sat in my mind like a locked door. I tried to follow the routine because routine was what I trusted. Drop-off, work, coffee, emails. Every normal action felt forced, like I was pretending for an audience that was not there. My phone stayed close to my hand, and every time it lit up, my body reacted before my mind did. Nothing. I thought about calling her. A call would be louder than a text. A call would break the system. A call would mean I believed something was wrong, and once I believed it, I would have to act. I called anyway, because the silence had started to feel intentional, like a decision. It rang until it did not, and I heard her voicemail. Her voice came through the speaker, normal and recorded and useless. I left a message that sounded calm, because I did not know how to sound worried without falling apart. Then I waited again, because waiting was what I always did when I did not want to fight reality. Minutes passed, then more minutes. I told myself she was busy. She was probably on a call. She was probably sleeping. She was probably in the shower. I cycled through harmless explanations like they were tools, like they could fix the feeling in my chest. But my practical side kept reaching for the next step, and it found nothing. There was no friend I could text, no neighbor I knew, no coworker of hers, no partner I had ever met, no emergency contact list in my drawer. I had a co-parenting relationship designed to run without connection, and now I needed connection for the first time in years. I looked down at my phone and realized the truth with a kind of shock that felt physical. And when she stopped replying, there was nobody else to call. At first it was just unusual. Then it became impossible to ignore. After I left that voicemail, I tried to force myself back into work. I stared at my screen and pretended the day was normal, but my attention kept snapping back to my phone like a rubber band. Every few minutes I checked it again, even though I already knew what I would see. No reply, no missed call, no nothing. I told myself I had no proof. I told myself a quiet morning did not mean danger. I told myself I was being dramatic because her message the night before had shaken me. I tried to shame the worry down, the way I had trained myself to do during the divorce. Worry led to conflict. Conflict led to mistakes. But this was not a custody argument. This was her being gone from the world in a way that did not fit any routine we had. I opened our text thread again and reread Monday night. The praise, the gratitude, the request to tell the boys she loved them. The words sat there, unchanged, like they had been waiting for me to understand them. I sent another message about the book, shorter this time, like making it simple would make it easier for her to answer. When she still did not respond, my mind started searching for harmless explanations again. Phone dead, appointment, napping, bad reception. I ran through them fast, one after another, and none of them quieted the feeling in my chest. Around mid-morning, I drove past her street again, telling myself it was just because it was on my route. It was not. I took the longer way on purpose. Her car was still there. It sat in the same spot, angled the same way, like it had not moved since yesterday. That should have still meant nothing, but it did not feel like nothing anymore. It felt like a clue I was refusing to pick up. I drove on and tried to stay calm because panic did not help anybody. I reminded myself that I had 2 kids in school, a job, a full day. I could not just abandon everything because a person did not answer a text. Then I remembered that she always answered, even when she was annoyed with me. She answered because the system required it. A text about a school book was exactly the kind of message our system was built for. Silence was not part of the system. I started thinking about small details that suddenly felt sharp. The missed goodnight call, the last message that sounded final, the car not moving, The way she had been warmer for a year, as if she had been preparing to soften her edges before leaving. I hated that thought. I pushed it away so hard it made my head hurt. But the harder I pushed, the more it came back. I checked the time and made a rule for myself, because rules were how I functioned when fear tried to take over. If she did not respond by a certain time, I would go to her house. Not because I was sure something bad happened, but because I needed to prove to myself that I was not neglecting a red flag. I picked a time that was close enough to matter but far enough to feel reasonable. I told myself it was a compromise between overreacting and doing nothing. Then I waited for that time to arrive, and the waiting was worse than any action. My imagination filled the gaps. I pictured her asleep on the couch with her phone under a cushion. I pictured her sick on the bathroom floor. I pictured her angry and ignoring me on purpose, which was almost comforting because it was familiar. But the message from Monday night kept breaking those pictures. It did not fit any of them. When the deadline came and went with no response, my body made the decision before my mind did. I stood up from my desk and felt the blood moving in my ears. My hands were steady, but my breathing was shallow. I did not want to tell anyone what I was doing because saying it out loud would make it real. I kept it quiet, like it was still a normal errand. On the drive over, everything looked ordinary. That was the worst part. Kids rode bikes in driveways. Cars passed me like it was any weekday. The sky was clear enough to make the neighborhood look clean and harmless. It felt wrong that the world could look that calm when my thoughts were moving so fast. As I got closer, I started rehearsing what I would do if she answered the door. I would act casual. I would say I was just checking because she had not replied. I would make it sound like a small problem with a simple fix. I would not mention the feeling I had. I would not mention her message. I would not accuse her of anything. I also rehearsed what I would do if she did not answer. I would knock. I would wait. I would knock again. I would call her phone and listen for it through the door. I would look for signs she was home. I would decide how far I was willing to go, and I did not like any of those decisions. When I turned onto her street, her car was still there, and now it felt less like a clue and more like a warning. I parked and sat for a second with my hands on the steering wheel. I watched the house like it might move. It did not. I walked up the driveway and noticed the first thing that did not belong. Packages sat near the front door, more than one, left in plain sight. They looked like they had been there longer than a few hours. Nobody had brought them in. Nobody had even shifted them out of the way. My throat tightened as I stepped closer, because those boxes were proof of time passing with nobody responding. When I reached the door, the packages outside told me something was already wrong. I stood on her porch with those packages at my feet, and I tried to explain them away. Maybe she had been in the shower. Maybe she had gone out the back. Maybe she had been sick and asleep. I kept building normal reasons because normal reasons meant I could still leave and pretend I had not been scared. I knocked once, then again. The sound felt too loud in the quiet neighborhood. Nothing moved inside. No footsteps. No TV. No dog barking. I listened for any small sign of life, the kind you heard without trying, and there was only the dull silence of a house holding its breath. I pulled out my phone and called her again, then held it close, like I might hear it ringing somewhere inside through the door. I heard nothing except the distant traffic at the end of the street and a lawn service engine 2 houses down. The outside world kept working. People kept driving, mowing, living. That normal noise made the silence behind her door feel wrong in a way I could not ignore. I stepped off the porch and looked down the driveway, checking the windows like I was a stranger. The curtains were still. The blinds did not shift. Her car sat there as if it had been parked days ago. The air smelled like warm pavement and cut grass, and it was almost peaceful. That peace made me angry. It felt like the neighborhood was cooperating with something. I went back to the door and checked the handle. I did it without thinking, like my hand moved on its own. It turned. The door gave a little, stopped on the chain, then settled. That small movement hit me hard. It meant she had not even locked up. She always locked up. She was careful. She was the kind of person who checked things twice. My thoughts started to split in two. One part of me stayed practical. The door was not fully locked. That could happen. People forgot. The other part of me heard that soft movement and felt my stomach drop because it sounded like the house was unguarded on purpose. I leaned in and looked through the gap the chain allowed. The entryway was dim. I could see the edge of a hallway and the outline of furniture. I saw nothing that told me she was fine. I saw nothing that told me she was not. I only saw the kind of stillness you saw in an empty building after hours. I stood there and tried to decide what I was allowed to do. We were divorced. This was not my home, but she was the mother of my kids, and I had no one else to call. There was no friend list, no neighbor contact, no local family. There was only me on the porch making a decision that felt heavy and final. He was still acting like this could be explained. I told myself I would just make sure she was okay. I told myself I would step inside and call out and leave if she answered. I told myself that if she was angry later, I would accept it. Anger was better than silence. Any argument would be better than what my mind kept trying not to picture. I unhooked the chain. My fingers did not feel clumsy, but they did not feel like mine either. Then I opened the door fully and stepped inside. The air was stale, like the house had been closed up too long. It was not the smell of trash or food. It was the absence of fresh air. The temperature felt steady, not warm like a home with someone moving around, not cold like a place left unattended, just flat and held in place. I paused and listened again. The quiet in there was different from the quiet outside. Outside, quiet meant distance between noises. Inside, quiet meant nothing had happened for a while. I noticed small sounds I normally would not notice. The faint hum of a refrigerator, a soft ticking that might have been a clock, the building settling in its own frame. I moved deeper into the entryway, careful not to step on anything, even though I had no reason to think I would. I did not want to leave a trace. I did not want to admit, even to myself, that I might be walking into something serious. I looked down at the floor near the door. Shoes were where shoes usually were. Nothing scattered, nothing broken, no sign of a struggle. That should have made me feel better. It did not. It made me feel worse because it meant this stillness had happened without noise. I called out her name into the house. My voice sounded too small, swallowed by carpet and walls. I waited for an answer the way you waited for an echo in an empty room. Nothing came back. I walked forward slow and kept my eyes moving. Living room, kitchen. The counters looked normal. A cup in the sink. A folded towel. Small domestic details that belonged to a life that should have been continuing. The normal objects did not comfort me. They felt like props left behind after a play ended early. I called out again, louder, and waited. Still nothing. In the hallway, the light changed. The air felt even more held there, as if the center of the house had been sealed. The doors along the hall were closed. I knew the layout from years of pickups and drop-offs at the beginning before we settled into faster handoffs. Bathroom, spare room, her bedroom at the end. I stopped at the bathroom door first and opened it. It was empty, no running water, no movement. I checked the shower curtain without thinking. Nothing. I moved to the next door, then the next. Each empty space was supposed to reduce my fear, but it did the opposite. Every room I cleared removed another harmless explanation. The house was not busy. The house was not hosting anyone. The house was not waiting for her to return in 5 minutes. At the end of the hall, her bedroom door was partly open, just enough to show darkness inside. The crack looked like a line drawn on purpose. I stood there and listened again, holding my breath without meaning to. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, useless. I had already called. I had already texted. The silence had answered all of it. I pushed the door open the rest of the way, and the room stayed still. The curtains were drawn. The air was thick. I took one step in and my eyes adjusted, and I saw enough to know I was too late. Then I saw her, and the explanation ended. My eyes took in the room in pieces like they refused to accept the whole picture at once. The bed, the drawn curtains, the shape of her on the floor, a dark stain that did not belong on carpet. My brain tried to label it as something else, something fixable, something that still had time. For a moment I thought she was holding a phone. That was the first lie my mind gave me. It felt almost comforting because a phone meant she could still call back. Then the light caught the shape in her hand the wrong way and the lie collapsed. It was a gun. I did not walk closer. I did not touch anything. I froze at the edge of the room like a person who had stepped into the wrong house by mistake. The air felt thicker there, and it seemed like the quiet pressed against my ears. I wanted to say her name again, louder, and force her to answer, but I already knew what silence meant now. I could see blood. I could see the angle of her body. I could see that nothing in that room was moving except my own breathing. The fact that she was my ex-wife did not soften anything. It made it worse in a different way. We had been separated for years, and yet she was still tied to every part of my life that mattered. Our kids lived inside that connection. The moment I understood she had ended her life, I also understood that my son's world had already been broken. They just did not know it yet. My body reacted late. When it did, it was not like crying or screaming. It was like my muscles turned to water. My hands started shaking in short, hard bursts, then stopped, then started again. My mouth went dry. My thoughts slowed down until they felt delayed, like they were arriving seconds after the things they were supposed to explain. In a crisis, feelings often came later. The steps came first. I backed out of the bedroom without turning my back on what I had seen. I moved down the hallway like I was carrying something fragile. I did not know what I was protecting because nothing could be protected anymore. But my body needed a task, and the only task that made sense was getting help. My phone was in my hand before I remembered taking it out. I called 911. My voice sounded calm in a way that did not match my insides. I gave the address. I said my ex-wife was on the floor and not responding. I said I saw a gun. I said there was blood. I kept my words short because long words would have opened the door to panic. While I waited, I stood in the entryway and did not move. I watched the front door like it was the only safe boundary left. I had the strange thought that if I left the house, it would become official. Like the moment I stepped outside, there would be no possibility that I had misunderstood what I saw. Time did not behave normally. Minutes stretched and snapped back. I heard a car pass. I heard a neighbor's dog bark once, then stop. I heard my own breathing and wondered why it sounded like someone else. When the officers arrived, the normal world entered the house in a sudden rush. Shoes on floor, radios, flashlights, the sound of practiced movement. They asked me questions right away, and I answered them without feeling like the answers belonged to me. They went down the hallway while I stayed near the front. I watched their shoulders disappear into the darker part of the house, and I felt something in me tighten, like a knot being pulled. I did not want them to confirm it, and I needed them to confirm it at the same time. More people arrived. More steps. More voices. I stayed out of the way because I did not know where to put myself. I stared at the packages still sitting by the door, and I hated them. They were proof that life had continued delivering small things while something enormous happened inside. Then the questions became the main event. They asked when I had last seen her. They asked about our custody schedule. They asked about Monday. They asked about the message she sent. They asked why I came today. They asked if we argued. They asked if she had enemies. They asked if she had been depressed. They asked if she had threatened anything before. Every question felt like it came from a world where this was a case, not a person. I understood why they did it. I did not blame them. But the more they asked, the more I felt like I was being pulled into a cold system where the goal was not comfort, only clarity. I told them the truth as cleanly as I could. We were divorced. We lived close, week on, week off. I had picked up the boys on Monday. She had texted that night. She had stopped replying Tuesday morning. I had called. I had waited. I had come to check. I had found her. I heard myself listing it like a timeline, like a report. It sounded almost reasonable, which made it feel insane. I had left my office thinking I was doing a quick welfare check. Now I stood in the entryway of a taped-off life. They asked about the gun. I told them I did not know the details. I did not know why it was there. I did not know if she had owned it long. That ignorance made me feel guilty, even though I knew it was part of the boundary I had built. I knew her as a co-parent. I did not know her as a person. Now that gap had teeth. Hours passed in that house, or near it, or in the space around it. I sat when they told me to sit. I stood when they told me to stand. At some point I gave my license and repeated my address and my phone number like I was checking into a hotel. At different moments, I felt different kinds of numbness. Sometimes it was like my mind had gone blank, a clean white wall. Sometimes it was like my mind was too full, buzzing with thoughts that could not land anywhere. The worst part was how quickly my brain started trying to solve problems. Who would tell her parents? Who would care for the boys if I could not function? What I would say to the school? How long the house would be inaccessible? How to handle the next custody week that now did not exist? The officers told me they would contact her parents. They said it like a normal step, like checking a box. I realized I did not even have her mother's number saved. That hit me hard in a quiet way. I had children with this woman, and I could not call the person who raised her. Eventually, they let me leave. They did not send me home with comfort. They sent me home with the weight of a fact and the responsibility that came with it. I walked out of her house and into sunlight that looked wrong. The neighborhood was still normal. Cars still passed. Someone still watered a lawn. The world stayed careless. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my fingers hurt. My phone showed the time, and the time meant something simple and cruel. School pickup was coming. After hours of questions, I still had one job left: go pick up the kids and pretend life was normal. I drove to the school with my hands locked on the wheel, and I practiced my face at red lights. I kept my jaw set. I kept my eyes dry. I forced my breathing to stay even, because the moment my body showed the truth would spill out. The school parking lot looked exactly like it always did. Parents waited. Cars crawled forward. Kids ran in lines and waved backpacks. The normal scene hit me like an insult. A few hours earlier, I had stood in a house that had gone cold, and now I was expected to merge into a pickup line like nothing had happened. I told myself I could do it for 10 minutes. I told myself I could be a father first and a person later. I told myself the boys deserved one more normal afternoon before their world changed. That was the story I used to make the lie feel like protection instead of fear. When I saw my older son and younger son walking toward the car, my stomach tightened so hard it felt like pain. Their faces were the same faces I saw every day, trusting and distracted and full of small problems. They carried their day in their bodies, not knowing mine carried something that could crush them. I kept my expression flat and steady as they got in. I moved my hands in simple motions. Seat belts, doors closed. The car started. I did not look at them too long because I was scared they would see it in my eyes. As I pulled out, my mind split again. One part of me stayed in that house, in the dim bedroom, in the still air. The other part of me stayed in the car, listening for hints of their moods, ready to answer homework questions and talk about dinner. I held both realities at once until it made me feel dizzy. He was carrying two realities at once: what happened and what the kids still believed. The drive home felt longer than it was. I watched the rearview mirror too often, checking their faces like I could measure how close they were to noticing. The younger one looked out the window and swung his feet the way he always did. The older one sat with his shoulders a little tense, the way teenagers did, already drifting into their own thoughts. I waited for one of them to mention their mom. When the moment came, I felt my heart jump. A simple comment from a child became a threat because I had no safe response. If I answered too much, I would open the truth. If I answered too little, they would feel it. I kept my words careful. I used vague language. I kept my tone calm. I hated myself for every second I kept it hidden, but I also feared what would happen if I told them in the car, on the road, with nowhere to go and no way to hold them if they fell apart. At home, the house should have felt like a place to recover. Instead, it felt like a stage I had to perform on. I watched them move through their routines, and every small sound made me flinch. A cabinet closing, a video playing, a child laughing at something that should have been harmless. Each normal sound made the secret louder. I moved through the afternoon on autopilot. Food, school papers, small tasks. I stayed busy because stillness would have brought the images back in full color. When I stopped moving, my mind returned to the details I had tried to avoid. The packages outside her door, the smell inside the house, the gun in her hand. The fact that this had already happened while our kids were asleep in my home the night before, safe and unaware. Guilt pressed on me in layers. Guilt that I had kept distance for years. Guilt that I had ignored her recent warmth. Guilt that I had not known who to call. Guilt that I had left her alone long enough for packages to pile up. Guilt that my boys were now playing and eating and living in a world that no longer existed. That night I watched my phone more than I watched the television. I expected her parents to call me. I expected the police to call again. Every vibration made my body tense. Nothing felt stable. Everything felt like it could tip over with one sound. When bedtime came, I moved slowly, like speed might break the mask. The younger one needed reassurance in the way he always did, with extra questions and extra closeness. I gave it to him and felt the lie sitting between us like a wall. The older one acted independent, but I noticed how often he looked up at me, like he was checking my face for weather. After they went to sleep, I sat alone and tried to decide what kind of father I was about to become. The father who told them immediately, without preparation, and watched their grief explode in the middle of a school week. Or the father who waited, tried to plan, tried to control the damage, and risked turning the truth into betrayal. I told myself I would do it soon. I told myself I just needed one day to breathe, one day to think, one day to be steady enough to hold them. Then I heard the older one shift in his room, and the sound reminded me of something I had been trying not to admit. Kids lived on patterns. They noticed gaps. They counted the small changes adults thought they hid well. And the pattern was already breaking. Wednesday morning felt thinner than Tuesday, like the air had less strength to hold my lie in place. I woke up already tired, because I had spent the night listening for small sounds from the boys' rooms and checking my phone for calls that never came. Every time the screen stayed dark, my mind invented a new reason why the truth might reach them before I was ready. I got them to school the same way I always did, but I watched them too closely. I measured their faces for changes. I listened for any mention of their mom, and every quiet second made my chest tighten. It was not relief. It was the feeling of waiting for a crack to appear in glass. The older one found the crack first. It started small, the way it always did with him. He noticed what other people missed, and he did not let go once he had a question. That morning he told me his mom had not answered him. He said it like a fact, not like a complaint. I felt my stomach drop because it meant he had been reaching out in ways I had not seen. It meant the silence had already been living in his pocket, right next to his phone, for longer than I wanted to believe. I kept my voice steady and acted like it was normal. I said she might be busy. I heard how weak it sounded as soon as it left my mouth. Busy was fine for an hour. Busy was not fine for days. He did not accept it. He watched my face, not the words. He had learned somehow that adults lied with their tone as much as their sentences. His confusion shifted into frustration fast. He told me he had tried again. He told me she always answered. He started listing the times she answered quickly like he was building a case. It was not about the phone. It was about the pattern. His whole life had been built on predictable handoffs and predictable replies. If one piece moved, the whole structure felt unsafe. I felt trapped because I could not fix the pattern. I could only hide the reason it broke. I tried to slow him down. I tried to make it about timing, about batteries, about meetings. I kept offering explanations that sounded possible to a 9-year-old, but not to a 13-year-old who knew how often people checked their phones. Each explanation landed and then slid off. He pushed harder. He said he wanted to go to her house after school. He did not say it like a request. He said it like a plan, like he was taking control of something that had become unstable. That was the moment my lie stopped being quiet. It stopped being something I carried alone. It started pressing against the outside world. Her house was not just a place. It was now a scene. It had tape. It had official people. It had neighbors watching their windows. If I drove my son there, the truth would arrive through someone else's mouth, someone else's face, someone else's rules. I pictured him seeing the door and knowing before I could even pull the car into park. The secret was no longer hidden. It was leaking. I told him we could not go. I tried to make it sound temporary, like a simple delay. I said we would check later. I said we would wait for her to reply. The more I tried to delay, the more his focus sharpened. He did not argue like a little kid. He argued like someone who believed I was blocking him on purpose. His anger rose in steps. First he questioned me. Then he challenged my reasons. Then he looked at me like I was a stranger. I felt the shift and it scared me more than his tone. It meant trust was starting to move. Once that happened, everything else could slide. The younger one sensed the tension without understanding it. He got quiet in the back seat, watching us. That made me feel worse. I had wanted to protect them, and now my protection was becoming a new source of fear in the car. At home after school, the older one checked his phone again and again. Each time he looked up at me, I felt like I was being scanned. He asked for my phone at one point, not as a joke. He wanted to use it to call her. I told him no, and I watched his face change at the answer. It was not just disappointment. It was suspicion. I tried to do normal tasks in front of him to show stability. I moved laundry. I cleaned a counter. I made dinner. I kept my hands busy because I could not let them shake. Inside, I kept hearing the officers asking questions, and I kept seeing that hallway, and I kept feeling the wrongness of the quiet house. But I could not let any of it show. The older one did not let it go. He said he wanted to walk over there if I would not drive. He said he could do it himself. He knew it was only 2 miles. He knew the streets. He knew the route. He said it with the kind of confidence that made my throat tighten because it meant he was close to acting without me. I told him he could not. I gave reasons that were thin and practical. I told him it was not safe. I told him it was not appropriate. I told him we needed to wait. The more I used rules, the more he resisted. It was like we were back in the divorce days, using logistics to avoid emotion, except now the emotion was a bomb sitting under the floor. I felt the moment coming when he would cross a line. He was the kind of kid who would test the boundary to see if it was real. If he believed I was hiding something, he would try to force it into the open. I could see it building in him like pressure. I could also see the other risk, the one I hated most. If he ran to her house and saw the tape, he would not just learn the truth. He would learn it in public, in front of strangers, with no warning, while I stood there helpless. I did not know how to tell him, but I knew I could not let him find out like that. So I looked for a place where I could buy time without making a bigger scene at home. I thought about the one place that still had structure, where adults could control information and watch for cracks. School. To buy time, I made one quiet move at school without telling my son. I went to the school office like I had a normal reason to be there, and that alone made me feel guilty. My hand stayed steady on the outside, but inside I felt like I carried something dangerous through a hallway full of children. I asked to speak to the principal in private. I did not want the secretary to hear. I did not want a teacher to walk by at the wrong moment. I did not want my son to see me through a window and wonder why I was there. I felt like I was hiding a fire behind my back. When the principal brought me into an office and closed the door, the quiet hit me. It was a clean, controlled quiet, the kind schools used to make problems small. My problem did not fit in that room. I told the principal my older son was going to miss school the following week. I said it like a scheduling issue, because that was the only way my mouth knew how to start. I expected a simple acceptance. Instead, I saw the principal's face shift into the look adults used when they suspected something more was underneath. The principal asked why. My mind went blank for a second. I had walked in there to buy time, but now I was being pushed toward the truth by someone with authority, someone who could decide how the school would treat my children once the truth came out. I realized I needed this person on my side, even if I hated the idea of letting the secret spread. I asked for discretion again, more firmly. I said I needed it kept private. The words sounded too formal, too careful, like I was arranging a business meeting. That tone made me feel sick, because this was not business. This was the worst fact of my life, and I was delivering it in the voice of a man trying not to shake. Then I told the principal that their mother had died. Even without details, the air changed. The principal's posture stiffened. The office felt smaller. It was like the room had suddenly become aware it was part of something larger and darker than school rules. I watched the principal's face as the meaning landed, and I felt something tight in my throat because I had been holding that meaning alone. The principal asked what happened. I could not avoid it. I said it had been suicide. Saying that word out loud made it heavier. It felt like I had put something solid on the desk between us. It did not feel like information. It felt like a weapon. The principal's reaction stayed controlled, but surprise still showed. Not shock like in movies, not tears, just that brief moment when a person realized a child's life had just been rewritten, and there was no way to soften the ink. The principal asked if the boys knew. My body tensed before I answered. This was the part I feared most, not because I thought the principal would yell at me, but because I could imagine the judgment in silence. I could imagine a look that said I had failed already. I admitted I had not told them yet. The words came out and hung there. I watched the principal process it, and in that pause I felt exposed. Police had questioned me for hours, but their questions had been about facts. This felt like something else. This felt like a quiet moral test. I explained it in the only way I could without falling apart. I said it had just happened. I said I was trying to figure out how to tell them. I said I did not want them to find out at school, in front of other kids. I said I wanted to do it in the right way. I left out the ugliest truth, which was that I was also afraid of their faces when I finally said it. I was afraid I would break in front of them and make it worse. The principal nodded in that careful, professional way, but I still felt the pressure increase. Because now it was not only me holding the secret. Now the school held it too. We talked about practical things after that. How teachers could give space. How the counselor could be ready. How they could watch for behavior changes. Every sentence was another confirmation that the normal version of our life was over, even if my son still believed it existed. I asked again that no one tell them. I said it had to come from me. I could hear how desperate I sounded, even though I kept my voice low. I imagined my older son being called into an office, hearing the truth from a stranger, and I felt panic rise behind my ribs. The principal agreed, but I still felt like I had lit a fuse. Because once an institution knew, the chance of accidental exposure grew. A wrong email, a whispered conversation, a well-meaning teacher offering sympathy too early. The secret had left my house and entered a building full of adults, and I could not control all of them. When I walked back out through the front office, The school looked the same as it always did. Posters on the walls, bells, kids moving in groups. The sight of it made me dizzy because the school was already preparing for a truth my sons did not have yet. Now one more adult knew, and that changed the pressure. And while the school learned the truth, the kids kept asking for the lie to make sense. The calls started the same day I told the principal. My phone rang with a number I recognized but had never wanted to see on my screen. Her mother, the boy's grandmother. I let it go to voicemail the first time because my hands shook too much to hold the phone to my ear. I told myself I needed 5 minutes to breathe. 5 minutes became 10. Then the phone rang again. I answered on the second call because I knew what silence would do to a grieving person. I also knew what her voice would do to me. I had already seen the scene. I had already been questioned for hours. I did not have anything left in me to manage another person's pain. Her mother sounded urgent, not calm grief, not slow sorrow. It sounded like panic wearing a thin mask. She wanted to speak to the boys right away. She wanted to tell them herself if I would not. She wanted to know what I had told them, what they had seen, what they had asked. I told her the truth I hated saying. I told her I had not told the boys yet. There was a pause that felt like a judgment even if she did not mean it that way. I could almost hear her trying to decide if I was protecting them or failing them. Then the urgency sharpened. She pressed harder. She said the boys needed family. She said she could help. She said this could not wait. I felt cornered in a new way. With my kids, I could delay and manage the story. With the police, I could answer questions and follow procedure. With her mother, there was no procedure. There was only emotion and blame and fear, all rushing forward at once. I became a gatekeeper without wanting the job. If I let her speak to them, she might break down and tell them everything in a raw, uncontrolled way. If I blocked her, I looked like a cruel man keeping grandchildren away from their family in the worst moment imaginable. I told her I would call her back when I had a plan. I said I needed time. The words sounded thin even to me. Time was the one thing everyone wanted, and it was the one thing I did not have. After I hung up, my phone stayed in my hand like a hot object. I stared at the screen and waited for it to ring again because I knew it would. It did. And again. Each time I saw her name, my body tightened like it was bracing for impact. I started avoiding my own phone, which made me feel weak and ashamed. I kept it face down on the counter. I checked it only when the boys were not looking. But kids noticed patterns, and they noticed my eyes going to the counter. They noticed me stepping into another room to listen to voicemails. They noticed the tension in my shoulders. The older one escalated first. By Thursday morning, he acted like he had been collecting evidence all night. He checked his messages before breakfast. He watched me like I was part of the problem. The frustration he had shown on Wednesday turned into something sharper, a kind of anger that needed a target. He told me again that his mom was not answering. He told me he wanted to go to her house. He told me he did not believe my reasons anymore. He did not say it in childish words. He said it in the way teenagers did when they believed adults were lying for control. I felt the trap tightening. If I told him the truth, I would be dropping a weight on him right before school, then sending him into a building full of other kids. If I did not tell him, I risked him forcing the issue in a way I could not stop. That morning he threatened to ditch school. He did not say it as a dramatic line. He said it like a plan he had already started to accept. He made it clear he would not sit in class and pretend everything was normal while I kept blocking him from the one place he believed held answers. Hearing that shook me more than I expected. I had always thought I could contain this by being calm and consistent, but his threat showed me I was losing control, not because he was a bad kid, because he was reacting to something true. The world had changed, and I was asking him to behave like it had not. 3 forces pulled at once: the grandmother, the older child, and the younger child. The younger one broke in a different way. He did not threaten or argue. He absorbed the tension and turned it inward until his body could not hold it. On Thursday, he resisted school before his shoes were even on. He clung to the idea of staying home like it was safety. He asked more questions than usual about pickup. He watched the front door as if something might come through it. When I pushed him to move faster, his face changed, and I saw fear behind it. Then he melted down. It happened fast, like a storm that had been building quietly for hours and finally found an opening. He cried hard and could not stop. He refused to get in the car. He panicked at the idea of being away from me, even though school had never been a problem like this before. He acted like leaving the house meant something bad would happen the moment he could not see me. I tried to calm him with the same steady voice I had been using all week, but the voice did not work anymore. He was reacting to something I could not name for him. He felt the secret in the air. He did not know what it was, but his body knew it was dangerous. While I managed the younger one, the older one watched with anger that turned into disgust. Not at his brother, but at me. It was like he believed I had caused this, like my refusal to give answers was turning our house into a pressure chamber. I got them to school late. I drove with my jaw clenched so tight my teeth hurt. I kept seeing my older son's face when he talked about ditching. I kept hearing my younger sons crying in the morning air. I kept thinking about the grandmother's calls, stacked on my voicemail like a countdown. When the phone rang again that afternoon, I answered because I could not take another message. Her mother pressed harder. She wanted access to the boys. She wanted to come over. She wanted a time. She wanted me to stop delaying the inevitable. I told her I needed to be the one to tell them. I told her I would do it soon. I tried to sound firm, but I heard the weakness in my own plan. Soon was not a day. Soon was not a time. Soon was fear dressed up as responsibility. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen and realized I had been improvising since Tuesday morning. I had been pushing decisions one day forward, then another day forward, hoping I would wake up ready. But readiness did not arrive on its own. All that arrived were more questions, more calls, and bigger reactions from my kids. That night I chose a date because I needed something solid to hold on to. I told myself I would tell them on Saturday. I told myself 2 more days would let me prepare, let me breathe, let me find the right words, let the school week finish so they could fall apart at home instead of in a classroom. I picked Saturday like it was a solution. But the week was not waiting for me to be ready. I had picked Saturday because it sounded like a real plan. It sounded like I had control. But by Thursday night, that choice started to feel like a weak excuse I hid behind while my kids suffered in front of me. The facts were fixed. She had died. I had found her. Police had been in and out. The school knew. Her mother kept calling. None of that could be undone. The only part I still held in my hands was timing, and timing had started to feel like a weapon I did not know how to carry. The older one scared me the most, not because I thought he would hurt anyone, but because I knew he would understand too fast. He would connect every strange moment from the week into one clear picture. The missing replies, my blocked attempts to go to her house, my tight voice in the car, my phone face down on the counter. He would see the pattern, and then he would turn that sharp mind on me. I kept imagining his face when he realized I had known for days. Not just that she was gone, but that I had kept him in the dark while he kept reaching out to her. I could handle his sadness. I did not know if I could handle his disgust. The younger one scared me in a different way. He did not need logic to break. He already felt something was wrong. His meltdown had proven that. He acted like the world was unsafe without knowing why. If I told him the truth in the wrong way, I feared he would stop sleeping, stop going to school, stop believing I could keep him safe. I judged myself from every angle, and none of them looked good. If I told them immediately, I feared I would do it badly, in panic, without support. If I waited for Saturday, I feared I was teaching them that the adults in their life could look them in the eye and hide something enormous. I also could not ignore a darker thought that kept returning when the house was quiet. Part of my delay came from the same habit that had helped me survive the divorce. I had always handled conflict by staying controlled and keeping distance. I had always believed that if I stayed calm, I could make hard moments smaller. This was not a moment that could be made small. No amount of calm could reduce it. I wanted someone to tell me there was a right choice. I wanted a set of steps. I wanted a script that guaranteed my kids would not hate me, that they would not fall apart in ways I could not repair. But I did not have anyone I trusted enough to ask. Her mother was too close to the grief, and I feared she would force her own timeline onto me. My friends knew our divorce story, and I did not want their opinions mixed with old judgments about my ex. The police were procedure. The school was policy. None of them could answer the real question that kept me awake. So I did what people did when they felt alone and cornered. I went online. I typed out the situation like it was a report, because that was the only way I could stay steady. I wrote that my ex-wife had died by suicide on Monday. I wrote that I still had not told our kids. I wrote their ages. I wrote that the older one was already asking questions and pushing to go to her house. I wrote that the younger one was melting down and refusing school. I wrote that the grandmother kept calling and wanted to speak to them. Then I wrote the part I could barely admit to myself. I wrote that I had decided on Saturday because I felt unprepared. I wrote that I did not know how to start the conversation. I wrote that I feared doing more damage if I told them in the wrong moment, but I also feared doing damage by waiting. As I wrote it, I saw my own choices laid out in plain words, and it made me feel worse. On the screen, my delay did not look like protection. It looked like avoidance. It looked like a father hiding behind a calendar while his kids sensed a disaster coming. Still, I kept typing because I wanted the truth from strangers. Not comfort, not sympathy, judgment. I wanted someone to tell me what my kids would remember later. Would they remember that I waited until Saturday so they could have school days without chaos? Or would they remember that I let them ask for their mother while I already knew she would never answer? When I finally posted it, I stared at the screen and felt my heart beat harder, because the moment I asked the public, I lost the last bit of privacy I had been using as a shield. And once you asked the public, you did not get one answer, you got a courtroom. When I refreshed the page, the first wave hit me like cold water. The responses did not come in gentle, they came in certain. Each person sounded like they were holding a gavel. Some of them focused on the kids, some focused on me, some focused on the grandmother, but almost no one lived in the middle. They did not say maybe. They said now or never, or this was wrong, or this was dangerous. I could feel my chest tighten with every new notification because each one forced me to look at my own delay from a different angle. The first camp came in hard and fast. Tell them now. That group treated waiting like a second injury. Their point was simple. My kids already sensed something. The older one had started hunting for answers. The younger one had started falling apart. To this camp, the uncertainty itself was the harm. They believed silence created a monster in a child's mind because a child would fill gaps with fear. They warned that if I waited, the boys would remember the waiting more than the news. They also hammered one idea that made my stomach sink. The longer I waited, the higher the chance they learned from someone else. I pictured it instantly. A kid at school hearing an adult whisper, a neighbor seeing the tape and saying something, the grandmother losing control on the phone, even a careless comment from a staff member who thought the boys already knew. This camp did not care about my plan for Saturday. They saw the lie leaking everywhere already, and they said my timeline did not matter if the truth arrived first. Another camp sounded calmer but still firm. Plan it carefully but do it soon. They did not attack the idea of timing. They attacked the idea of waiting for a perfect moment. They treated telling the kids like a difficult procedure, not something to avoid but something to prepare for. They pushed structure over panic. Choose a quiet time, turn off phones, make sure there were no rushed appointments right after. Use simple words. Do not dress it up. Be ready for questions. Be ready for the same question repeated again and again, because kids did not process grief in one conversation. They insisted I should expect my older son to get angry and my younger son to cling. They told me to repeat the same reassurances until they became real for the boys. I did not feel comforted by that, but I did feel something like a handrail appear. This camp made it sound possible to survive the moment without it turning into chaos. They did not promise it would be clean. They promised I could be steady. Then another camp focused on something I had not wanted to admit I needed: professional support. They argued I should not do this alone. They did not mean police. They did not mean family arguments. They meant a grief counselor, a school counselor, someone trained to help children absorb shock without drowning in it. They urged me to contact resources through the school, through the district, through community services, and to set up help immediately. Not weeks later, when the crisis had already burned a path through the boys. Immediately. This camp also pushed me to think beyond the confession moment. They wanted a plan for the next days. What would bedtime look like after I told them? What would school look like? Who would pick them up if they could not stay? Who would sit with them if I needed to talk to police again? How I would handle their sudden fear of leaving my sight. Their point was that I had been thinking about one sentence on Saturday, but the real job was what came after. Reading that made me realize how small my plan had been. Saturday was not a finish line. It was the start of a long stretch I had not pictured. Another camp went straight for the family issue. Do not hide it from the grandmother. Their focus was not on my kids alone, but on the larger circle around them. They said the grandmother was grieving too, and blocking her could create a second disaster on top of the first. They warned that I could end up fighting a custody-style battle in the middle of a funeral. They argued that the boys would need their mother's side of the family, and that cutting them off, even temporarily, could feel like I was erasing their mom. But even that camp did not tell me to hand over the wheel completely. They talked about boundaries, clear rules, controlled contact, an agreed time to talk. They warned me the grandmother might try to tell details in her own grief, and they said I had to protect the boys from adult panic. They wanted me to widen the support circle while keeping the kids safe inside it. That camp made me feel angry and guilty at the same time. Angry because I was being told to manage another adult's emotions when I could barely manage my own. Guilty because I knew the grandmother's calls were not just pressure. They were also desperation. She had lost her daughter. She wanted to hold onto the only living pieces that felt connected to her. Then there was a camp that focused on what not to say. Protect the scene details. Their comments were blunt. Do not describe the weapon. Do not describe blood. Do not describe the way I found her. They insisted that honesty did not mean dumping every fact on a child's mind. They believed I should start with the simplest truth and only add more if the boys asked. They warned that a child could carry one violent image for life if it was planted too early, too vividly. That camp made my throat tighten because I had the images. I did not need to imagine them. They were already stuck behind my eyes. I had been trying all week not to see them when I looked at my kids' faces. The thought of putting those images into my sons' minds felt like another kind of harm, something irreversible and cruel. Some of the responses told me to use direct language without graphic detail. That was hard to even read. Direct language meant no soft phrases that confused kids. It meant no disappearing, no going to sleep, no leaving us. It meant death. It meant she died. It meant permanence. I knew that was right, and I hated it because it meant I had to be the person who turned their world off with a sentence. Then there was a camp that surprised me, not because it let me off the hook, but because it saw me. Father's shock mattered too. This group treated my numbness and delay as a trauma response. They argued that my brain might have been buying time because it could not hold the reality yet. They said shame would make me freeze longer, and freezing would make everything worse. They pushed me to get my own support quickly, not as a luxury, but as a requirement if I wanted to stay present for the boys. They did not say I should keep waiting. They said I should stop punishing myself and start moving. They wanted me to accept that I had been in crisis since Tuesday morning. They insisted a father could be grieving and still be responsible, but he could not do either well if he stayed isolated. That camp gave me a strange kind of relief, and then it took it away. Relief, because it explained why I felt trapped in my own mind. It took the relief away because it also meant I could not hide behind shock anymore. If this was a normal trauma response, then I needed to treat it like an emergency, not like an excuse. As I read, the camps collided in my head. Tell them now felt like jumping off a roof with no net. Plan it carefully felt like building a net while the roof burned. Get professional support felt like calling the fire department while I still stood inside the house. Do not hide it from the grandmother felt like opening the door and letting more smoke in. Hopping it brought help instead of panic. Protect the details felt like protecting my sons from the exact images that haunted me. And the camp that focused on my shock kept repeating one uncomfortable truth. I was not the only victim here, but I was the only adult with my kids in my house. Different people agreed on one thing. The kids needed safety, and safety started with clarity. I sat with that for a long time after the screen went dark. Clarity was the opposite of what I had been offering them all week. I had been offering delays, vague answers, and calm faces. I had been offering a steady schedule with a hole in the middle. No wonder the younger one panicked. No wonder the older one pushed. They were trying to make sense of a life that stopped making sense. The comments did not hand me a perfect answer. They gave me a map of consequences. Each path had a cost. Waiting until Saturday had a cost. Telling them immediately had a cost. Letting the grandmother in had a cost. Keeping her out had a cost. The only thing I could choose was which cost my sons would pay first. I kept thinking about the older one's eyes on me, measuring my face like a lie detector. I kept thinking about the younger one clinging like the world could vanish if he let go. I kept thinking about the taped-off house 2 miles away, holding the truth like a locked room. And I understood something that made my skin feel tight. The public could argue all night, but none of them would sit on my couch and watch my sons' faces change when the words landed. But none of these camps were in my house on Saturday. He will be. By Friday night, I stopped pretending Saturday was just another day on the calendar. It had turned into a wall I was walking toward, step by step, while my kids watched me and sensed the impact before they understood why. I had told myself I waited because I wanted to protect them, but I saw the damage my protection already caused. My older son had started treating my answers like evidence of guilt. My younger son had started acting like separation meant danger. They reacted to the empty space where the truth should have been, and that space kept growing. I kept thinking about the first second after I told them. Not the whole conversation, just the first second. The exact moment their faces changed. The moment their bodies understood before their minds caught up. I did not fear their tears as much as I feared their silence. Silence from the older one meant he had shut a door inside himself. Silence from the younger one meant his fear had gone somewhere deeper. I also kept thinking about trust and how easy it was to break without meaning to. My older son did not just want information. He wanted to know if the adults around him told the truth when it mattered. If he learned I had known since Tuesday and still let him send messages into nothing, he might not forgive me for a long time. He might understand later when he was older, but understanding later did not repair what happened now. At the same time, I could not ignore the other fear. If I told them too abruptly, if I stumbled and collapsed in front of them, I might make the moment feel unsafe. Kids did not only remember what they were told. They remembered the face of the adult who told them. They remembered the tone. They remembered if the room felt steady or if it felt like the floor opened. I had been practical my whole life, and practicality did not help me here. There was no tool for this. There was no checklist that guaranteed my sons would be okay. There was only a choice between two kinds of harm. The harm of delay, which I had already seen, and the harm of impact, which I was about to cause with my own mouth. I tried to build a plan anyway, because a plan was the only thing that kept me from freezing. I thought about where to sit. I thought about keeping the house quiet. I thought about not having the television on in the background, not letting noise distract them or cover their reactions. I thought about turning my phone off so the grandmother could not call in the middle of it and force a second explosion. I also thought about what words I could live with saying. Simple words, direct words. I knew vague language would confuse them and invite hope, and hope would become another injury. I told myself I would not put images in their minds. I would not hand them the scene that haunted me. I would not unload the details just because they burned in my head. But I also knew I could not control what they asked. The older one would ask questions like he always did, because questions made him feel like he had power over chaos. The younger one would ask the same question again and again, because he would not believe the answer the first time. I would have to stay present through all of it. This is not only about a single conversation. It is about what happens in the hours after. That line stayed with me because it made the moment wider and scarier. The truth was not a sentence. The truth was the start of a new reality that would follow them to school, to bed, to the back seat of my car, to every holiday, to every handoff that would never happen again. I kept seeing my older son's anger as something physical, like heat. I imagined him looking at me and deciding I had controlled him, managed him, treated him like a child who could not handle reality. I imagined him refusing comfort, refusing my hand. I imagined him walking away to his room and shutting the door, and I imagined that door becoming a habit. Then I saw the younger one in my mind, smaller than he looked at 9, because fear made kids shrink. I imagined him asking if I was going to die too. I imagined him watching me constantly, checking my face for signs I might disappear the way his mother had. I imagined him unable to sleep unless I stayed close. I was afraid of both reactions because they pulled me in opposite directions. The older one needed respect and honesty. The younger one needed safety and reassurance. Both needed the same truth, but they would carry it differently. I also could not stop thinking about the grandmother. Her repeated calls had felt like pressure, but they had also felt like a warning. If I did not tell the boys, someone else might. If that happened, my sons would not only lose their mother, they would lose the belief that I could guide them through the worst moment of their lives. By Saturday morning, I accepted a hard fact. Readiness was not coming. I could wait another day, another week, another month, and I still would not feel ready to say it. I would only feel more trapped, and my sons would only feel more confused and more suspicious. So I committed to the timing, even though the timing scared me. I held on to the idea that doing it myself, in our home, with as much steadiness as I could hold, was still better than letting the truth arrive through a crack in the world. If you watched this and imagined yourself in my place, I wanted you to answer the one question I could not escape. What did least harmful timing look like when the kids were already suspicious and already showing stress? If you had to choose between telling them immediately while everything was raw or waiting for a planned moment while the lie kept leaking, which choice protected children better? And why? If you had to pick one of those camps, which one would you follow? And what would you do first to keep the kids safe and keep trust intact? Saturday is coming, and there is no perfect way to say it.